What we are witnessing right now is not some routine adjustment buried in legislative fine print. This is a turning point. In March 2026, 15 states are set to end concealed carry restrictions, and that single sentence carries more weight than most people realize, because this isn't just about permits or paperwork or administrative reform. This is about a fundamental shift in how power is distributed between the state and the citizen, and it's happening faster than anyone expected. For decades, concealed carry was treated as a privilege granted by the government, not a right exercised by the people. You had to ask, you had to justify, you had to wait. And even then, approval often depended less on the law and more on who you were, where you lived, or how a local authority felt on a given day. That system quietly created two classes of citizens, those trusted by default and those forced to prove themselves worthy of exercising a constitutional protection. What these 15 states are doing now is rejecting that framework outright. This change is rooted in a broader legal awakening that has been building for years. Courts have been increasingly clear that constitutional rights are not optional, not conditional, and not meant to be filtered through layers of discretionary bureaucracy. The right to keep and bear arms, like the right to speak freely or practice religion, was never intended to hinge on a permission slip. And as judicial precedent has tightened its grip on that principle, state legislatures have been forced to confront a hard truth. Continuing restrictive carry regimes is no longer legally defensible in the way it once was. But there's more going on here than legal compliance. There's a philosophical realignment taking place. These states are signaling that they trust their citizens. They are acknowledging that law-abiding people are not the threat they were long portrayed to be. For years, the argument was that loosening carry laws would lead to chaos, to violence in the streets, to a breakdown of public order. Yet state after state tested those claims and the sky didn't fall, crime didn't explode, society didn't unravel. Instead, what unraveled was the narrative that restriction automatically equals safety. March 2026 becomes a symbolic deadline because it marks the point where hesitation gives way to momentum. 15 states moving at once sends a message that this is no longer an isolated experiment or a regional trend. It is a national recalibration. When that many jurisdictions align on an issue this controversial, it tells us the political ground has shifted beneath our feet. What once seemed radical is now becoming standard. What once required courage now feels inevitable. And let's be honest about why that matters. Because concealed carry restrictions were never enforced evenly. They fell hardest on ordinary people without money, influence, or connections. If you were wealthy or politically connected, barriers had a way of disappearing. If you weren't, the law became a wall instead of a framework. Ending these restrictions doesn't just expand rights on paper, it flattens a system that quietly favored the powerful while limiting everyone else. This shift also forces a deeper conversation about responsibility. When the state steps back, the citizen steps forward. Ending restrictions doesn't mean ending accountability. It means redefining it. The responsibility to know the law, to act within it, and to carry oneself with discipline doesn't vanish when permits do. In fact, it becomes more personal, more immediate. These states aren't saying rules no longer matter. They're saying the starting assumption is trust, not suspicion. What's remarkable is how quickly resistance to this idea has softened. Just a few years ago, proposals like this were dismissed outright. Now they're being implemented on timelines, with effective dates and transition plans. That tells us lawmakers are responding not just to courts, but to voters who are tired of being treated as liabilities rather than stakeholders. People want clarity, they want consistency, and they want laws that reflect reality instead of fear-driven hypotheticals. This moment also exposes a deeper divide between symbolism and substance. For a long time, restrictive carry laws served as political signals rather than practical solutions. They made it look like something was being done, even when evidence showed otherwise. Removing them strips away that symbolism and forces leaders to focus on real public safety strategies that don't rely on limiting the rights of those who already follow the law. And here's the part that makes this moment impossible to ignore. Once these changes take effect, reversing them becomes extraordinarily difficult. Rights expanded are far harder to claw back than rights restricted are to impose. That's why March 2026 matters so much. It's not just a date on a calendar, it's a line crossed, a precedent set, a new baseline established, whether people agree with it or not. The reality is this: the country is moving into a new legal era, and these 15 states are leading that transition. They are redefining the relationship between citizen and government in a way that will ripple outward, influencing court cases, elections, and policy debates far beyond their borders. Now here's where things get complicated, and where urgency really sets in. Because when laws change this fast, clarity doesn't always keep pace. 15 states ending concealed carry restrictions at nearly the same moment creates freedom, yes, but it also creates confusion, and confusion is where people get hurt, legally and otherwise. The law on paper may be clear to attorneys and legislators, but for everyday people living near state lines, traveling for work, or simply trying to follow the rules, the reality can feel like a legal minefield. One state removes restrictions. The neighboring state keeps them. Another modifies enforcement but not language. Another delays implementation by a few weeks. And suddenly, what was legal yesterday becomes questionable today, or legal at home but illegal 30 miles down the road. This isn't hypothetical. This is exactly how people end up facing charges they never saw coming. Not because they intended to break the law, but because the law changed faster than public understanding did. And that gap between what the law says and what people think it says is dangerous. It puts ordinary law-abiding citizens at risk of making assumptions that can carry serious consequences. Ending restrictions does not mean ending complexity. It means the responsibility shifts sharply onto individuals to understand a legal landscape that is now fractured and uneven across the country. Law enforcement agencies are feeling this pressure too. Officers on the ground are expected to enforce laws that may have changed weeks ago, sometimes with limited training updates and conflicting guidance. In one jurisdiction, a stop results in no issue at all. In another, the same situation leads to detainment, questioning, or worse. When enforcement lags behind legislation, discretion fills the gap, and discretion is never applied evenly. This is where the promise of expanded rights collides with the reality of uneven systems. Rights are only as strong as their clarity. If people don't know where they stand, freedom becomes fragile. And that's why this transition period matters as much as the policy itself. Because what happens in the months immediately following March 2026 will determine whether these changes empower people or trap them in uncertainty. There's also the issue of interstate recognition. Many assume that once restrictions are lifted in their state, that freedom travels with them. It doesn't. State sovereignty still rules this area of law, and crossing a border can instantly change what is permitted, how it must be carried, or whether it is allowed at all. One wrong assumption, one outdated piece of advice, one social media post taken as fact instead of law, and suddenly someone is dealing with consequences they never imagined. This is why awareness is not optional anymore. It's essential. The fall of restrictions raises the stakes for education, not lowers them. People need to understand not just what they are allowed to do, but where, when, and under what conditions. Ignorance won't be treated as innocence, no matter how sweeping the legal shift may feel. And let's address another uncomfortable truth. Not everyone wants this clarity. Ambiguity has always been a tool. Vague laws and inconsistent enforcement give institutions flexibility, leverage, and control. Clear rules limit that power. When citizens understand their rights precisely, it becomes harder to manipulate outcomes after the fact. That's why public education often lags behind legal reform. It's inconvenient for systems that benefit from uncertainty. This transition also exposes a cultural divide. Some people will rush to celebrate without preparing. Others will panic without understanding what has actually changed. Both reactions are risky. One leads to careless assumptions. The other leads to fear-driven compliance that isn't legally required. Neither serves the public well. The reality is this: expanded rights demand expanded responsibility. Not just personal responsibility, but collective responsibility, from llama. Curs to educators to media outlets. Clear communication matters now more than ever. Misreporting, exaggeration, or selective framing doesn't just misinform, it actively puts people in legal jeopardy. And then there's enforcement after the fact. Courts will be flooded with cases testing the boundaries of these new laws. Judges will interpret gray areas, appeals will redefine limits, precedent will evolve in real time. During that process, real people will be caught in the middle, serving as the test cases that clarify what the law actually means. That's the hidden cost of rapid change. So the question isn't just whether restrictions are ending. The real question is whether people are ready for what replaces them. Because freedom without understanding isn't empowerment, it's exposure. And the states moving forward now are betting that their citizens can rise to that challenge, even if the systems around them struggle to keep up. This moment demands attention, caution, and awareness. Because the law is changing whether people are watching or not. And those who don't pay attention now may pay a much higher price later.